Listen carefully, not with your physical ears only, but with the depth of your spirit. There are moments in life when silence is not emptiness, it is preparation. When delay is not denial, it is divine protection. And when everything feels like it is standing still, heaven is actually standing guard over your next dimension. And I come with a message not of fear, not of confusion, but of divine alignment. Chosen one, heaven has increased your security. Something major is about to unfold. You may not understand what you are going through right now. The closed doors, the sudden resistance, the people who walked away, the opportunities that slipped through your hands. You thought it was loss. But in the realm of the spirit, nothing aligned with your destiny is ever truly lost. Some things were removed because they were distractions from what God is building around you. Some people were shifted because they were not assigned to your next level. And some battles were never meant for you to win, because heaven already decided you would not need to fight them. There is a divine covering over your life right now. It is as if unseen hands have drawn a boundary around your destiny and declared, "No weapon formed against this one shall prosper." Not because life won't form weapons, but because heaven has upgraded your protection system. And hear this deeply. What you have been calling pressure is actually positioning. What you have been calling delay is actually divine timing. Recalibration. What you have been calling confusion is actually God separating what is temporary from what is eternal in your life. Because something major is about to unfold, not small, not ordinary, not predictable, but something that will make you look back and say, "Now I understand why I had to go through that." The Spirit of God is not random. Heaven does not waste pain. And destiny does not forget those who remain faithful in hidden seasons. You were not overlooked. You were being preserved. You were not rejected. You were being redirected. And now in this hour there is a shift in the atmosphere around your life. Doors that resisted you before will begin to recognize your name. Systems that ignored you will begin to respond to your presence. And what once required struggle will begin to respond to alignment. But hear the deeper truth. This next move will not just be about elevation, it will be about responsibility. Because when heaven increases your security, it is not only to protect you from what is outside, but to prepare what is inside. Your character is being strengthened, your discernment is being sharpened, your spirit is being stabilized. Because where you are going, confusion cannot follow you. Where you are going, emotional instability cannot sustain you. Where you are going, you will need clarity, not chaos. So even now, the Spirit is whispering, "Do not rush this season. Do not despise this process. Do not abandon what I am still building." Because something major is about to unfold, and when it unfolds, it will not look like coincidence. It will look like divine orchestration. It will look like timing you could not manipulate. It will look like favor you could not earn. It will look like doors only God could open. So stand firm, chosen one, not because everything is easy, but because everything is aligned. Not because you see the full picture, but because heaven does. And when it finally unfolds, you will understand. Nothing was wasted. Nothing was random. Nothing was forgotten. It was all preparation for this moment. The increase of your security is the announcement of your next unfolding. There are moments in a chosen one's journey when everything looks like silence, but heaven is not silent. It is strategic. It is intentional. It is guarding what you cannot yet see. You thought the delay was abandonment, but it was actually divine concealment. You thought the pressure was punishment, but it was actually protection in disguise. Because not everything that feels heavy is harmful, and not everything that feels closed is rejection. Some closures are simply heaven increasing the security around your assignment. You may not recognize it now, but there has been a divine surveillance over your steps. Not in fear, not in oppression, but in sacred preservation. The things that tried to destroy you were never allowed full access. The conversations that could have misdirected you were interrupted. The relationships that could have drained your destiny were quietly dissolved. And at the time, you called it loss. But heaven called it safeguarding. There is a mystery about the way God handles those he has marked for something greater. He does not expose them prematurely. He does not let every voice have access to their spirit. He does not allow every opportunity to attach itself to their destiny. Because in the realm of purpose, exposure without preparation becomes destruction. And so, chosen one, what you called isolation was actually divine restriction placed on your environment. You wondered why certain doors refused to open despite your efforts. You questioned why your prayers felt like they were hitting silence. But what if the silence was not absence? What if it was calibration? What if heaven was adjusting the timing of your emergence so that when you step in, nothing about your arrival is ordinary? There is a level of destiny where delay becomes design, where waiting becomes weaving, where stillness becomes strategy. The unseen hand of God has been active in your life even when your emotions could not trace it. There were battles you never saw because they were fought in dimensions you cannot access. There were traps you never stepped into because something stronger than awareness was guiding you. Call it mercy, call it grace, call it divine intervention, but the truth remains. You were being held, and now there is a shift happening. Not loud, not chaotic, but deeply structured. It is the kind of shift that cannot be explained through human reasoning because it is not rooted in human systems. It is rooted in divine architecture. Something within the spiritual atmosphere around your life is being reorganized. Old permissions are being revoked, new alignments are being established, and without announcement, heaven is increasing your security level. This means that what used to access you will no longer reach you in the same way. What used to distract you will lose its pull. What used to confuse you will lose its authority over your mind. It is not that the battles have disappeared, it is that your covering has intensified. There is a difference between being exposed and being enclosed in divine protection. And you are entering a season of enclosure. You may feel the tension of transition. That strange discomfort when familiar things no longer fit. That unease when old environments no longer feel like home. That inner stirring that tells you something is changing even though nothing visible has shifted yet. That is how divine security upgrades feel at first. They disrupt familiarity before they reveal destiny. Do not mistake this disruption for destruction. It is refinement. It is recalibration. It is heaven adjusting your sensitivity so you do not miss what is coming. Because what is coming will require discernment, not emotion. It will require alignment, not assumption. It will require clarity that only comes from seasons of hidden preparation. There is also a quiet removal happening. Not everything leaving your life is dramatic. Some things are simply fading out because they cannot survive the weight of where you are going. Connections that once felt essential are now losing their grip. Patterns that once felt normal are now becoming uncomfortable. And this is not coincidence, it is divine separation. The security heaven places around a chosen one is not just external protection, it is internal strengthening. Your discernment is being sharpened without your awareness. Your spiritual sensitivity is increasing through experiences you did not request. Your ability to recognize truth from illusion is becoming more precise. And you may not understand why certain things suddenly feel different, but that is because you are no longer the same vessel you were before. There is a reason certain attacks never fully manifested. There is a reason certain plans against you collapsed before completion. There is a reason some doors closed abruptly. It was not randomness. It was governance from a higher realm. Because when heaven assigns purpose, heaven also assigns preservation. And in this season, there is a deeper message being impressed upon your spirit. Not everything requires your reaction. Not every opposition requires your engagement. Not every delay requires your panic. Because increased security means reduced exposure. And reduced exposure means selective engagement with what truly aligns. You are being taught, even in silence, how to move differently, how to think differently, how to respond differently. Because where you are going, impulsive reactions cannot survive. Emotional instability cannot sustain access. Confusion cannot coexist with clarity. And so, heaven is training you in unseen ways, shaping your responses before your environment changes. There is a weight of glory forming around you that you cannot yet articulate. It is subtle, but it is real. You feel it in your moments of reflection, in your sudden detachment from things that once controlled your attention, in the quiet realization that you are not who you used to be. That is not personal evolution alone, it is spiritual preparation. And even now, as everything feels like it is in suspension, there is movement in the unseen. Doors are being positioned. Timelines are being adjusted. Encounters are being arranged. Nothing is late in the eyes of heaven. Everything is synchronized beyond human perception. You are not being forgotten in the waiting. You are being fortified in it. And what feels like stillness is actually construction. Deep, invisible, intentional construction of something that will not collapse under pressure when it finally appears. There comes a point in the journey of a chosen one when heaven begins to intervene not just through doors opening, but through voices being silenced. And this is not punishment, nor isolation in the way the world understands it. It is divine filtration. It is the careful removal of influence that could distort clarity, delay obedience, or contaminate alignment. Because when God is preparing someone for a major unfolding, one of the first things he does is regulate what they hear. You may not always recognize the danger of wrong voices in real time. Some of them do not sound harmful. Some of them even sound wise, supportive, or familiar. But heaven sees beyond tone and intention. Heaven sees trajectory. And sometimes a voice that feels comforting today can become a wait tomorrow. So in divine strategy, silence is not emptiness, it is protection from distortion. There is a sacred mystery in how God separates a chosen one from certain frequencies. It does not always happen through conflict. Sometimes it happens through distance that slowly becomes permanent. Conversations that once felt constant begin to fade. Opinions that once shaped your thinking begin to lose relevance. Influences that once directed your emotions begin to lose access. And you are left in a space where the noise decreases, but the clarity increases. At first, the absence of those voices can feel unsettling. You may even interpret it as loneliness or abandonment. But what if it is actually refinement? What if heaven is removing interference so you can finally hear direction without distortion? Because clarity cannot coexist with chaos, and divine instruction cannot compete with competing voices. There are seasons where God intentionally reduces external input so that internal revelation can rise. In those moments, you begin to notice something unusual. Your discernment sharpens. You begin to sense things you could not sense before. You begin to question things you once accepted without hesitation. You begin to recognize patterns in people, in environments, in conversations that you previously overlooked. This is not overthinking. This is spiritual recalibration. When God increases your security, He also decreases your vulnerability to manipulation. And one of the primary ways manipulation enters a life is through voice suggestion, repetition, influence. So heaven begins to regulate what has access to your inner world. Some conversations end without closure because closure is not required when protection is the objective. Some relationships fade without explanation because explanation is not necessary when preservation is the priority. You may remember moments where you were about to be pulled into decisions that did not align with your destiny, and something interrupted it. A delay, a distraction, a sudden change of direction. At the time, it may have seemed random, but in truth, it was divine interruption of influence. Because heaven does not only protect your body or your circumstances, it protects your decisions. There are voices that carry assignment over your focus. Not every opinion is neutral. Not every advice is aligned. Some words carry seeds that grow into confusion if they are not filtered through discernment. And so, in seasons of preparation, God begins to isolate your hearing, not to make you disconnected from people, but to make you connected to truth. This is why silence becomes more frequent in certain seasons, not because God is absent, but because He is eliminating competing signals. When too many voices speak over your destiny, clarity becomes difficult. And when clarity becomes difficult, obedience becomes delayed. So heaven simplifies your environment so that direction becomes unmistakable. You may also notice that certain people begin to misunderstand your silence. They may interpret your withdrawal as distance, your quietness as disinterest, your separation as rejection. But what they do not see is that your inner world is being reorganized. You are no longer responding from noise, you are responding from alignment. There is also a deeper layer to this process. Some voices are not just external, they are internal echoes of past influence. Memories, fears, learned limitations, and old agreements you made with pain or survival. And in this season, even those internal voices are being challenged. Thoughts that once felt automatic no longer dominate your decision-making. Fear-based responses begin to lose authority, and you find yourself pausing longer before reacting, not out of hesitation, but out of transformation. When heaven increases your security, it is not only about what is removed from your surroundings, it is about what is recalibrated within your perception. You begin to hear differently. You begin to interpret differently. You begin to sense differently. And this shift can feel strange because it does not align with your previous identity. There is a reason certain conversations no longer feel engaging. There is a reason certain environments no longer feel compatible. There is a reason certain discussions drain you instead of stimulating you. It is not rejection of people, it is redirection of attention. Because where you are going, your attention must be preserved. not scattered. The chosen one often goes through a phase where misunderstanding increases while clarity deepens. People may misread your silence as arrogance. They may misinterpret your boundaries as pride. They may not understand why you no longer respond to what once triggered emotional reactions in you. But what they do not realize is that your internal system is being upgraded. There is a divine logic in this reduction of noise, because when the major unfolding arrives, you will need precision, not confusion. You will need discernment, not distraction. You will need alignment, not emotional reaction. And so heaven trains you in silence before it releases you into expression. Even rejection of certain voices is not emotional, it is protective. There are things you no longer entertain not because you are superior, but because you are being structured for responsibility. Responsibility requires stability. Stability requires clarity. Clarity requires silence from interference. There is also a spiritual maturity being formed in you during this process. You are learning not to respond to everything. Not every statement requires your correction. Not every opinion requires your defense. Not every misunderstanding requires your explanation. Because energy preservation is part of destiny management, and in this quiet restructuring, something powerful is happening. Your spirit is becoming more sensitive to truth than tone. You are learning to distinguish between what is spiritually aligned and what is emotionally appealing. Between what sounds right and what is right in alignment with destiny. Between what is familiar and what is ordained. This is why some connections feel like they are naturally dissolving, not through conflict but through misalignment. Conversations lose depth, shared spaces lose resonance. Mutual understanding begins to fade without force, and what remains is a quiet confirmation that access is being regulated by heaven itself. There is nothing accidental about the voices that remain and the voices that fade. It is all part of divine structuring, because when God is preparing to reveal something major in your life, He ensures that your perception is not crowded. He ensures that your interpretation is not compromised. He ensures that your hearing is tuned to what matters most. And so in this season, even the silence is speaking. Even the distance is communicating. Even the removal of noise is revealing intention, because heaven does not only speak through addition, it also speaks through subtraction that leads to clarity. There is a mystery that only becomes clear in hindsight, when the weight of what you endured finally reveals the wisdom it carried. It is the mystery of delay, not as denial, not as rejection, but as divine timing that refuses to bow to human urgency. And for the chosen one, this is often one of the most misunderstood seasons of all. Because everything within you wants movement, acceleration, confirmation, and arrival. Yet heaven seems unbothered by your timeline, not because it is indifferent, but because it is precise. What you called delay was never inactivity in the spiritual realm. It was unseen alignment. It was orchestration beyond your awareness. It was heaven rearranging details you could not manage, positioning people you could not control, and preparing outcomes you could not yet perceive. And in the middle of it all, you were being shaped not just for what you desire, but for what you are destined to carry. There are delays that are not about doors refusing to open, but about the person walking toward them not yet being ready to stand inside what is behind them. Because access without preparation becomes overwhelming. Opportunity without structure becomes chaos, and elevation without maturity becomes destruction. So heaven, in its wisdom, delays manifestation while it develops capacity. You may have prayed for speed, but God was working on stability. You may have asked for answers, but God was building endurance. You may have desired breakthrough, but God was forming character that could sustain what breakthrough brings. And so, what felt like silence was actually construction in progress. There is a type of delay that tests perception more than circumstance. On the surface, nothing appears to move. Doors remain closed. Timelines remain unchanged. Expectations remain unmet. And if you are not spiritually discerning, you begin to interpret this as absence. But beneath the surface, something else is happening. Alignment is being perfected. Because what God is preparing for you is not just an event, but a sequence. Not just a moment, but a system. Not just an opportunity, but a shift in environment that requires multiple elements to be synchronized. And synchronization cannot be rushed. If one detail is premature, the entire structure becomes unstable. So heaven delays to preserve coherence. In this process, your patience is not simply being tested, it is being refined. Because patience in divine terms is not passive waiting, it is active trust under invisible construction. It is the ability to remain steady when nothing confirms movement. It is the discipline of continuing forward internally even when externally nothing changes. There are also moments in this delay where your faith is stretched beyond comfort. You begin to question timing, direction, and sometimes even identity. You wonder if you misheard, if you misunderstood, if you imagined the promise. But those questions are not indicators of failure, they are indicators of pressure. And pressure is often the environment where deeper revelation forms. Because the truth is, delay has a refining voice. It exposes what impatience hides. It reveals what urgency conceals. It surfaces what comfort suppresses. And in that exposure, you begin to see yourself differently. You see where your dependence was misplaced. You see where your expectations were premature. You see your understanding of timing needed transformation. There is also a quiet strengthening happening during this period. You do not always recognize it because it does not feel dramatic. It feels repetitive. It feels slow. It feels like nothing is happening. But internally, your endurance is expanding. Your emotional stability is deepening. Your discernment is sharpening. Your reaction patterns are shifting. And these changes are not loud, but they are foundational. You may notice that things which once frustrated you no longer have the same emotional grip. Situations that once triggered urgency now meet you with calm observation. Delays that once caused anxiety now produce reflection instead of panic. This is not emotional detachment, it is spiritual maturation. And still, the external timeline remains unchanged, which is why this season is so challenging. Because you are changing, but your environment is not yet reflecting it. You are evolving internally while externally everything appears paused. And in that tension, identity is being stabilized. There is a deeper reason why heaven allows delay to stretch perception. It is to separate impulse from instruction. Because impulsive decisions often arise when clarity is absent. But in delay, impulsivity loses strength. You begin to wait longer before reacting. You begin to observe more before concluding. You begin to listen more deeply before moving. And that shift alone protects you from outcomes you cannot yet handle. There are paths you thought were being blocked, but in truth they were being withheld until your capacity matched their weight. Because not every open door is a blessing in the timing you desire. Some open doors require preparation to avoid collapse, and so heaven, in its wisdom, refuses premature access even when desire is strong. This is why some opportunities seem to circle back later in a different form, at a different time, with a different weight. It was never removed, it was reserved. Reservation in divine terms is not absence, it is timing control. You may also begin to notice that while delay persists in one area, growth accelerates in another. That is intentional. Because heaven rarely delays everything at once. It creates imbalance in perception so you do not rely on one single area for validation. While one door appears closed, another dimension of your life begins to strengthen quietly. This ensures that your identity is not tied to a single outcome. And in the midst of it all, there is a deeper shaping happening in your relationship with trust. Not trust in outcomes, but trust in process. Not trust in timing you can see, but trust in timing you cannot control. This form of trust is not emotional, it is foundational. You begin to understand that God is not late. He is layered. And what feels like waiting is actually convergence. Multiple unseen threads aligning simultaneously even when you cannot detect movement. There are also unseen protections embedded within delay itself. Things you were not ready to face are held back. Situations that would have overwhelmed you are postponed. Encounters that could have destabilized you are rerouted. And while you experience stillness, you are also experiencing safety. Because not all acceleration is favor. Sometimes acceleration is exposure. And heaven protects chosen ones not only by advancing them, but by restraining timing until wisdom is present. In this hidden process, your spiritual senses become more attuned. You begin to recognize that not everything delayed is denied. Not everything paused is forgotten. Not everything silent is inactive. You begin to perceive depth beneath surface inactivity. And even though the external world continues to measure progress by visible movement, you begin to understand a different metric: internal alignment. Where your thoughts are, where your emotions are stabilizing, where your discernment is sharpening, where your spirit is learning stillness without fear. There is a sacred intelligence behind this season that cannot be rushed or bypassed. It is shaping something in you that cannot be taught through instruction alone. It must be formed through waiting, through observation, through trust, through restraint. And while everything appears unchanged on the surface, something irreversible is happening beneath it all. There is a moment in the journey of a chosen one when everything begins to shift without announcement, without applause, without visible confirmation, yet the inner world recognizes that nothing is the same anymore. It is not loud. It is not chaotic. It is not dramatic in the way people expect transformation to look. It is precise, almost imperceptible to the natural eye, but undeniable to the spirit. This is the realm of alignment, where heaven begins to reorganize your life according to what has already been decided in the unseen. You may still be standing in familiar surroundings, but your perception of them is no longer the same. What once felt normal begins to feel temporary. What once felt stable begins to feel transitional. What once felt permanent begins to feel like it is loosening its grip. And this is not confusion, it is the beginning of divine alignment. Because alignment does not always start with movement in your environment, it often starts with movement within your awareness. There is a quiet authority in this season that begins to override your previous patterns. Decisions that once felt difficult become clearer. Attachments that once felt strong begin to weaken without struggle. Desires that once dominated your thinking begin to lose urgency. It is as if your internal compass is being recalibrated, pointing you away from what is familiar and toward what is ordained, even when you cannot yet see it fully. In this process, heaven is not only opening doors, it is aligning identity with destiny. Because access without alignment creates instability. Opportunity without alignment creates confusion. And elevation without alignment creates internal fragmentation. So before anything external shifts permanently, something internal must settle into truth. You begin to notice that your responses are changing. Situations that would have previously pulled you into emotional reaction now meet you with stillness. Conversations that would have once demanded explanation now meet you with silence. And this silence is not avoidance, it is maturity forming in real time. You are learning when to speak, when to observe, and when to withdraw without guilt. Alignment often feels like separation before it feels like connection. You may find yourself naturally stepping back from environments that once felt important. Not because of conflict, but because of incompatibility. The energy no longer matches. The purpose no longer resonates. The direction no longer aligns. And even though nothing external forces you out, something internal gently releases you. There is a divine intelligence in this release. It is not random distancing, it is structured repositioning. Heaven is not just the moving you from places, you are being relocated within purpose. And relocation is rarely comfortable because it disrupts familiarity. But it is necessary because familiarity is not always destiny. As alignment deepens, your discernment becomes sharper. You begin to perceive intention beyond words. You begin to sense atmosphere beyond appearance. You begin to recognize when something is aligned with your assignment and when it is merely appealing to your emotions. This sensitivity is not overthinking, it is spiritual refinement. There is also a noticeable shift in how you experience time. What once felt urgent begins to feel structured. What once felt delayed begins to feel intentional. You stop measuring your life by external comparison and begin measuring it by internal confirmation. And this shift alone begins to detach you from anxiety-driven timelines, because alignment does not operate under pressure, it operates under precision. You may also experience moments where old versions of yourself feel distant, almost unrecognizable. The way you used to think, react, and engage begins to feel like something you are observing rather than embodying. This is not detachment from identity, it is the transition between identities. One version is dissolving while another is forming. In this season, resistance decreases not because challenges disappear, but because your interpretation of them changes. What once felt like opposition begins to feel like redirection. What once felt like blockage begins to feel like guidance. What once felt like confusion begins to feel like restructuring. And slowly, your internal narrative begins to shift from why is this happening to what is this aligning me toward. There is also a deeper purification taking place in your motivations. You begin to question why you want what you want. You begin to examine whether certain desires are truly aligned with your purpose or simply shaped by environment, expectation, or emotion. And in that examination, some desires dissolve naturally, without struggle, without force, because they were never rooted in your assignment. Alignment often removes what ambition alone could not release. You begin to realize that not every open path is meant to be walked, and not every closed path is a loss. Some closures are protection, some openings are distractions, and discernment becomes the filter that determines direction. In this recalibration, your spirit begins to prioritize peace over pressure. If something disrupts internal clarity, it becomes less attractive regardless of external appeal. If something strengthens inner stability, it becomes more valuable even if it requires patience. This inversion of value is part of alignment. There are also moments of stillness where nothing appears to be happening externally, yet internally everything feels reorganized. Thoughts settle differently, emotions respond differently, intuition becomes more pronounced. It is as if your internal system is being reprogrammed to operate at a different frequency. And this frequency no longer tolerates confusion the way it used to. As alignment progresses, your environment begins to respond slowly to your internal shift. Certain conversations naturally fade. Certain connections lose momentum. Certain opportunities no longer return. Not because of rejection, but because of mismatch. And this mismatch is not emotional, it is structural. Heaven does not force what alignment dissolves naturally. There is also a growing awareness that your life is no longer random in its unfolding. Even what feels uncertain carries structure beneath it. Even what feels delayed carries intention beneath it. Even what feels disconnected carries a hidden thread of preparation beneath it. And this awareness begins to stabilize your emotional response to uncertainty. You stop interpreting silence as absence. You stop interpreting delay as denial. You stop interpreting separation as failure. Instead, you begin to sense a deeper orchestration that is not dependent on visible evidence to be real. In this state, obedience becomes less about effort and more about recognition. You begin to recognize when to move and when to wait without overthinking. You begin to recognize when something is for you and when it is simply near you. You begin to recognize when timing is aligned and when it is premature. And this recognition becomes your guidance system. There is a quiet strengthening happening within your identity that does not require validation. You begin to rely less on external confirmation and more on internal clarity. And this shift is critical because alignment cannot be sustained through external approval, it must be anchored in internal certainty. Even your understanding of progress begins to change. Progress is no longer defined by visible expansion alone, but by internal coherence. You begin to see growth in emotional stability, in spiritual sensitivity, in mental clarity, in reduced internal conflict. And these invisible shifts become more meaningful than external acceleration. As alignment continues, there is a sense that your life is being gently but firmly guided into a narrower path, not restrictive in a limiting sense, but focused in a purposeful sense. Fewer distractions, clearer direction, deeper awareness. And in this narrowing there is strength being formed that broad options could never produce. You begin to understand that alignment is not about having everything, it is about having what is necessary for destiny without distortion. There is a moment in every chosen one's journey when what was once hidden begins to surface with undeniable clarity. Not through chaos, not through confusion, but through divine timing that cannot be replicated or delayed by human effort. It is the moment when heaven's guarded work begins to manifest in visible form, and what was once processed in silence starts to take shape in reality. This is not ordinary change, this is unveiling. This is the revealing of what has been preserved, protected and positioned under divine supervision. For a long time, you may have felt like nothing made sense. You may have questioned why certain things were taken away, why certain doors remained closed, why certain relationships faded, and why certain opportunities never fully materialized. But what you did not see was the unseen hand of preservation. What you did not perceive was the careful shielding of your destiny from premature exposure. And now what has been held back is not being released carelessly, it is being revealed strategically. There is a sacred weight to this moment, because what heaven guards, heaven does not release without purpose. And what is released after divine guarding carries a different kind of authority. It does not come fragile. It does not come unstable. It comes refined through timing, strengthened through delay, and secured through alignment. And when it begins to unfold, it does not ask for permission, it commands recognition. You may begin to notice that things once distant are suddenly approaching your awareness. Situations that once seemed irrelevant begin to connect. Conversations that once felt random begin to reveal meaning. Encounters that once appeared coincidental begin to show orchestration. It is as if the fragments of your journey are beginning to align into a coherent pattern that was always there, but previously hidden from your understanding. This unfolding is not accidental. It is structured. It is intentional. It is the result of layers of preparation that were invisible while they were being formed, because heaven does not reveal prematurely what has not been stabilized internally. Everything you went through in silence was not wasted, it was shaping your capacity to receive what is now emerging. There is a deep recalibration happening in how you perceive your own story. What once felt like confusion begins to feel like preparation. What once felt like delay begins to feel like protection. What once felt like rejection begins to feel like redirection. And in this shift of perception, peace begins to replace internal resistance. The unfolding also brings a deeper awareness that nothing in your journey was random. Not the closed doors, not the unexpected pauses, not the sudden removals, not the quiet seasons where nothing seemed to change externally, but everything was shifting internally. All of it was part of a design that required time to fully mature before becoming visible. And now, visibility is beginning. But this visibility is not just about external change, it is about recognition of internal transformation. You are no longer the same person who entered the hidden season. Your discernment has deepened. Your emotional reactions have matured. Your understanding of timing has stabilized. Your sensitivity to truth has sharpened. And these internal shifts are what make external unfolding sustainable. Because heaven does not reveal destiny to an unchanged vessel. It reveals destiny through an aligned one. There is also a strange but powerful feeling that begins to emerge in this phase. It is the feeling of recognition without explanation. You may find yourself sensing that certain moments are significant before they fully manifest. You may feel alignment before confirmation arrives. You may perceive direction before clarity is fully formed. This is not imagination, it is spiritual awareness becoming more active than logical reasoning. In this stage, what was once hidden begins to align with what has been prepared. Connections begin to form that make sense of past confusion. Opportunities begin to surface that reflect previous delays. Paths begin to open that mirror earlier resistance. And suddenly, the pieces begin to reveal a structure that was always present but not yet visible. There is a sacred intelligence behind this timing. Because if everything had unfolded earlier, it would not have carried the same weight. If everything had opened sooner, it would not have matched your capacity. If everything had been revealed prematurely, it would not have sustained its purpose. So heaven waited not out of neglect, but out of precision. Now, as things begin to unfold, you may notice that your emotional response is different than you expected. Instead of overwhelm, there is clarity. Instead of confusion, there is recognition. Instead of fear, there is quiet understanding. Because you have already been prepared internally for what is now appearing externally. There is also a deeper responsibility that comes with unfolding. Because what is revealed is not just for observation, it is for stewardship. What is opened is not just for enjoyment, it is for alignment. What is given is not just for possession, it is for purpose. And this awareness begins to shift how you engage with what is coming into your life. You start to move more intentionally. You start to observe more carefully. You start to listen more deeply. Because you understand that what is unfolding carries weight, and weight requires wisdom to handle. There is also a spiritual confirmation that begins to settle within you during this time. Not loud confirmation, not external validation, but internal certainty. A knowing that does not depend on explanation. A peace that does not depend on circumstances. A clarity that does not require approval. And this inner stability becomes the anchor for everything unfolding around you. Even relationships begin to take new shape in this season. Some connections deepen because they align with what is unfolding. Others naturally distance because they cannot integrate with it. And this separation is not emotional, it is structural. Because what heaven is revealing cannot remain entangled with what no longer fits its direction. There is also a noticeable shift in how opportunities present themselves. They no longer feel forced or confusing. They begin to carry clarity within them. They feel aligned rather than chaotic. They feel structured rather than random. And this change in energy helps you discern what is truly meant for you and what is simply passing through. As everything unfolds, there is a growing awareness that your life has been under careful orchestration far beyond what you could control. The timing, the pauses, the removals, the redirections, all of it begins to reveal itself as coordinated preparation. And this realization brings a quiet reverence for the process you once questioned. you begin to see that nothing was wasted. Not the silence, not the waiting, not the confusion, not the transitions. All of it was forming something that is now beginning to reveal itself in layers you could not previously comprehend. And even as unfolding continues, there is still a sense that more is coming, more is aligning, more is being revealed beyond what is currently visible. Because divine unfolding is rarely a single moment, it is a sequence. A carefully timed revelation that continues to expand as you are able to hold it. And within that expansion, you are being carried into something that was always meant for you. Something that was always preserved for this exact timing, something that was never lost but only waiting to be revealed in fullness.